From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
And hello again, and welcome once again to another edition of the program formerly known as Chicago Newsroom here on Can TV. As of today, we're changing our name to Occupy Chicago Newsroom because I think that'll get us up a little higher on the Googles. The Googles will rate us higher if we put Occupy in there. So Occupy Chicago Newsroom is our new name, at least for today. We'll see how it goes. Hello and welcome to another edition here on the Can TV. We have a developing story happening right now because Mayor Emanuel has released his budget, and all the guys who normally would deprecate the budget seem to be saying, "Nice job, Mayor Emanuel." So I don't know what that means, but we're certainly getting good reviews today for a budget that's about 1/3 new revenues and about 2/3 cuts. And we want to try to see if we can figure out what some of those cuts are. It'll be a while before we can figure that out because not all of the details are actually available in the media right now. But anyway, joining us to talk about this today is Angela Caputo. Angela coming back on the show again from Chicago Reporter. Thanks for being here. Nice to have you back. And Steve Franklin joining us for the first time today. Steve Franklin is, among many things, the new president of the Chicago Headline Club. So sort of like the I don't know, the first guy of journalists in Chicago, watching out for the interests of all those journalists in Chicago, right?
We're on the watch 24 hours. I personally haven't slept in about 6 months.
I know, I know you haven't. And a lot of other jobs too. You're also with, of course, the Chicago Community Media Workshop and a lot of other things, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of those as time goes by this morning. But let's start off with that budget. First of all, the optics of the budget. Looks like Mayor Emanuel skated through it yesterday. He was able to criticize Mayor Daley very effectively without using his name, and he was able to at least convince people who you need to convince that he actually that he's slayed the $636 million dragon. Did he?
Well, I guess the devil's in the details there.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? Yeah. I mean, we're talking about a lot of fees that have been increased. As far as I see it, it looks like we're looking at about $78 million in new revenues, and that's a lot because we're talking about a water bill increase that's going to. If that passes, people are going to get really annoyed when they figure out that their water bills are going to more than double over the next couple of years.
I think Angela made a very good point. You have to look at, so the message is, I'm cutting taxes, I'm cutting expenses, I'm taking on taboo things. That's all important. The important thing is, where's the money being spent? And so far, we have to take a deep look at, who's getting the money. Is it being shared equitably? Is it being shared across the city? That's the more important issue. Taking on the, and not directly naming his predecessor was brilliant. So, those are significant issues. The water tax would increase in water costs, although the city says that's one of the lowest in the United States. Still seems to me to be regressive, and so does the increase in parking, although New York and other cities have markedly increased the parking fees.
One thing about the water that I do find very interesting is that the city has for so long been unmetered. Water is too cheap to meter here in Chicago, and it's about time that we fix that. And one way to fix that is exactly what they're doing by dramatically increasing the cost to people who don't have meters and saying, look, for free, we'll come up with a meter in. Now, I know this for a fact because I know what my metered house, what my water bill is, and I know what the house next door, which is unmetered, is, and it's pretty amazing. The house next door pays a lot more than I do with a meter, and I use a lot of water. So,
well, I think one thing that's interesting about these two particular increases, both with the water and then also on the parking downtown, is that the mayor has committed. He said that this money is going to be spent on upgrades to the delivery system, which is aging and is in desperate need of repair. I mean, it is expensive, and we're throwing money at quick fixes rather than really fixing the system. And the other is to the parking. You know, he said that that money would be committed to mass transit. And Mayor Daley, you know, he increased taxes and took money from the parking meter fund. And that was one of the biggest criticisms by wonky policy people, was that this money is being, instead of being spent on reducing congestion in the loop, or, you know, privatizing water that would go to someone else. These are money, you know, revenues that it looks like he's saying would be captured and redirected to upgrading those systems. So I haven't seen what that commitment looks like, but I do think that that's interesting and different.
That is also, that's a very interesting point that you raise, Angela, because you wouldn't be looking at putting in 900 miles of new water main if you were thinking about dumping the system onto a private contractor. So that, as we always know about budget documents, they're a bunch of numbers, but what they really are is a statement of your philosophy, and that's very interesting. Let's talk a little bit about...
Let me just stop for a second.
Yeah.
I think Angela, again, makes a very good point. The best way, I think, to look at this budget is a forensic analysis of what's working in Chicago.
Yeah.
And so when you look at water, the best way to look at it is that what weren't we doing? What's the problem? The same thing with the garbage collection. If I'm correct, what they're saying is they're going to drop the district-controlled garbage collection in favor of a citywide grid. That should have happened, what, 100 years ago? Didn't this make sense? And why do we continue that? So
Politics.
Right, politics, but also you know, just there's so many things that we're beginning to see should not have taken place.
Right. Well, we've talked a lot on the show before about the secret power that Rahm Emanuel has, which is that he didn't come up through the ward organization. He didn't have no you know, ward committeemen in order to run in this race, and he's been very good at either spontaneously saying or having very bright people write for him some spontaneous things to say. And one of them yesterday I thought was very interesting when he said, you know, it's time for us to end this ward-by-ward collection of garbage. Could you imagine if FedEx or UPS came in here and decided they were going to do their deliveries on a ward system? I mean, it's crazy. You wouldn't do it. And no private sector company would do that. And now we're not going to do it with garbage. Whether you're going to really see a dramatic savings or not, I'm still skeptical about. But I mean, there could be a few tens of millions, maybe.
Well, basically, it's basically an attack on how Chicago politics operate. The power of the wards, you know, not just, you know, having every ward, every district having a police department. That's an even more important challenge, I think. Yeah. And we are closing down 3, you know, police stations. That's going against a lot of issues. I look at this as, you know, it's the best way. Step back and say, what weren't we doing? Where the mistakes are, and how's this going to change? And I think, again, is this long term, or is it just money being thrown at it?
And another one of these things, as long as we're talking about these kind of larger picture things, it's a kind of a small bureaucratic thing, but I think it's dramatic as heck, which is this notion of moving the fire department command in with the police department. I mean, this is something that you want to talk about 100 years. It goes back to, I think the division between the fire and the police department existed before the city even was incorporated in 1833 or whatever it is. They've always been completely separate entities. They don't like to talk to each other unless they have to. They have their own boats. They have their own, you know, their own everything. And now, for the first time, from on high, they're being sent this very clear signal: you guys are going to start working together. And it's going to raise the real question of, the next time we have a major catastrophic event in the city, where does the command come from? It's going to be very interesting to watch.
Well, I think already they're both working through OEMC, correct? So I think that's the body that's really bringing them together.
Well, I mean, again, to give some credit to Mayor Daley, that is one of the things that he really tried to do in creating the Office of Emergency Management. But I think there were some people who said the reason he was doing it because he was trying to build do a build around because of the problem that it was. I mean, I think there were many comments made at the time that the 911 center was built that they practically had to build 2 floors. I mean, there was a section where there were uniformed fire people taking calls and uniformed police people taking calls, and when the call came in, it would have to get sent to one or the other. That's crazy. We don't need that kind of division, and it looks to me like maybe Rahm Emanuel is taking the first steps toward beginning to build a kind of an emergency response system instead of a police department and fire department. It'll be interesting to see.
I think also it's an impetus for the kind of change that we saw in New York City. If I'm correct, wasn't there a tragedy involving 2 firemen who died? And what came out of it, are you familiar with this?
No.
What came out of it was that the phone system they used wasn't adequate, couldn't reach them. And I was astounded by that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is one of the things that came out of out of 911 is how many, in fact, probably all of the nation's major police and fire systems were on different radio frequencies and had very great difficulty communicating with each other, and that's only now beginning to be changed because of the federal allocation of radio spectrum and all that other geeky stuff that we won't get into now. I did see something very interesting in the CNC website this morning. This is a sentence that I thought was particularly interesting. The pension contributions that the city faces, the pension contributions again will combine with hundreds of millions of dollars in debt service and will together eat up the entire city tax levy.
I read that too. Yep.
Really?
And the city's picking up the teachers' pensions too.
Yeah.
Increasing their share.
Well, dumping some of it off back onto the Board of Ed so that they can increase their own taxes. But I mean, that's where we've come to. I mean, there's no better illustration of that. That you get your tax bill and you look at all the different people who tax you, and the city of Chicago gets, $250 or whatever it is. None of that money goes to pick up garbage or light the street lights or any of the services that we normally think of. It goes to debt service and pensions.
Sure. Well, the problem with Illinois and Chicago especially was we ignored pensions for years.
Right.
And that's why in terms of the state, we're at close to the very bottom in our indebtedness because of our failure to cover our pensions.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've got a budget. We'll see where the city council goes with it. The responses seem to be largely positive, so we'll see. We're losing, apparently, as far as I can see, it looks like we're going to lose the Department of Environment as part of that. The department was considered surplus and unnecessary, and there'll be a lot of other, some 500 people being fired. So we'll see. You want to talk a little bit about Occupy Chicago?
I think it's very important. I think to Occupy United States, I think the whole effort, the response from the left, from the center, from everywhere is fascinating across the United States. And I think what's even more fascinating was where the unions in the last week, and also a lot of community groups got together. I mean, this is not just it's not your 19-year-old with very long hair dancing in the street because he doesn't want to go home that night. I think it reflects a deep distrust, a deep sense of losing a sense of what's happening in the country. But the fascinating thing is that if you look at the demonstrations here in Chicago, is that they were very well organized, very thoughtful, very planned. And I think, among my brothers and sisters in the news media, they failed to pay attention to that. I think here and across the country, if you look at the stories, they tend to focus on the disruptions. They focused on what was more bizarre, and they didn't talk about the ails and the complaints of these people, and they're very diverse.
Yeah, I think that was some of the reporting was about how it was even a leaderless movement. So they were reporting on the lack of focus and leadership within the movement. Which
I am, as a media guy, I'm fascinated by the way that story flashed over. That for weeks and weeks it was just kind of a kicker, or it was a traffic report item. So and so street has been blocked, or whatever.
Well, I think. I think what that reflects is the reality that in the communities where I work, where people are really struggling financially, there's a lot of pain. It's like a depression right now has set in on a lot of communities. But when I go back to the neighborhood where I live, which is the Ukrainian Village, there isn't that sense of pain. I have neighbors who are refinancing their mortgages. They have, these rock bottom interest rates. It's freeing up cash. They still have the same job they had 10 years ago, making decent money. And I think that that, you know, the bottom really hasn't fallen out for a lot of people who the media is really targeting as their audience. I think that that's the reality. I think that the pain is, you know, there's a big divide between people who are maintaining and actually prospering, even in this economy, and those who are really, really just have hit a depression.
I think we're very good at self-delusion and amnesia.
We being
us Americans.
Oh.
We're very good at not accepting the facts. If you look at the figures that came out recently, it's stunning. Most middle-class persons have not had a pay increase in real dollars since the late 1970s. That's astounding.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, what we tend to do is we compensate because we don't want to seem as failures in our own eyes. We don't want to accept the fact that things are not working out, so we charge more on our credit cards, we work harder, we do less. And I think what you're saying is, you know, yes, I think people aren't accepting it, but I think they're suffering more. And I think, you know, the Tea Party is the other side of the moon of this. It's the folks who feel, oh my goodness, things are not working what I want them to be. This is the side that says, wait a minute, I need help. I'm not getting anywhere, and someone has to help me out. And I think there are a lot of people in that situation. Look at the high unemployment rate, which is, you know, which is minimal compared to if you're black or Latino and uneducated, of college graduates. You know, this is unusual. Look at the number of elderly returning to work. So I think across we do have a lot of problems. Americans, you know, our strategy when faced with problems, we take Pepto-Bismol. We don't take to the streets. We don't demonstrate. And I think that's why Occupy Chicago, Occupy New York, all over the country, reflects, you know, this is a change. And
we were talking earlier, the staff here, because we're not far away from where the demonstrations have been, and how interesting it is that you'll see the demonstrators right to the curb, and then CTA buses coming along, and the buses are honking in solidarity with the demonstrators. It just seems to be a kind of a very broad and rather sudden joining. I mean, and then you get Bill Clinton saying he understands, Rahm Emanuel kind of doing a little dance around it, like, well, yes, it's easy to understand. And I think even someone from one of the leaders of Citigroup yesterday said that, well, I can understand how they might, it doesn't affect me personally, but I could certainly see there might be some difficulties. I've heard there are difficulties out there in the country. So
flying back from the Cayman Islands, they must look at these people and say how painful it is.
How much painful it is for them. Yeah. We always get too far into the discussion before we get to something really important that one of our panelists has talked about. And Angela, this is your shot here. Chicago Reporter has been doing some phenomenal work on reporting on the CHA. And one of the pieces that you did recently spurred a whole big discussion that's been going on about who is the Chicago Housing Authority for. And it came from your piece about one and done, and I want you to just give us a little, to the extent that you can summarize weeks of work in a head bite. What was that story?
Well, you know, what I did was I looked at the one strike policy, and essentially under that policy, if anyone is arrested who is a guest of a CHA resident or who lives in the household, one person is arrested, then the whole family gets put on notice that they're being put out, and they have to fight it out in eviction court. And what I found was that, you know, a vast majority of these cases are not, of the arrests, have nothing to do with the primary leaseholder, 85% in 2010.
That's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. And more than half of the cases over the past 6 years resulted in the criminal case being tossed or the person found not guilty. So this
I'm gonna stop you just because when you hear these staccato listings of numbers, you can kind of lose the impact of what you're saying. You're saying that a huge number of people lost their leases at the CHA, were booted out of the CHA because of something that a family member or somebody else did. In how many percentage? Was it not the primary leaseholder who was involved?
85%.
85%.
Yeah.
So you could be a perfectly legitimate tenant in a CHA development, living up to all the CHA rules, and your son,
your grandson who you're raising could get caught smoking pot out front or somewhere in the neighborhood, which is 20, it's 28% of the cases are just, these low-level marijuana.
And you're out. That's it.
And the rest of the kids that you're raising and yourself, you're out. Or you're put on notice, and if you can beat it in eviction court, then you can stay, or possibly you can end up barring the person who committed the offense.
But that doesn't seem to happen.
And I think that what's really interesting about this is that there was a correlation between the number of one-strike cases going up in communities where the plan for transformation is roaring forward and buildings are coming down, and also over that time, the number of cases that are based on a low-level arrest, on a misdemeanor, charge, has gone up. In 2006 or in 2005, it was 37% of the cases were based on a misdemeanor, and in 2010 it was 76%. Wow. So there are more and more people who are fighting eviction cases over low-level charge that was not committed by the leaseholder. And I think what's really important about this story is just this double standard. An arrest, there's a difference between an arrest and a conviction. There
certainly is. Something we've long ago forgotten in the United States.
Yeah. And a majority of these cases involve a black male, many adolescents being charged. And so, essentially, reality is that it's easier for a black teenage boy to get picked up around the Cabrini Green area, or to be with a group of 4 kids and the police arrest all 4 of them for fighting, but then the police take them back to the station and realize it's only 2 that were fighting and they let the other 2 go. But those 2 their family is now fighting to keep their apartment.
The 2 who were not involved.
Who were not involved.
Right.
The police said, forget about it, we're not even going to, it's not even going to become a case in the court. 7% of these cases never even made it to the courts. They were arrested, they were charged with something, and then in 7% of the cases it never even went to the courts. In more than half of the cases it went to the courts, and there was not the evidence, there was no probable cause, they were found not guilty, or prosecutors decided not to move the case.
The Housing Authority said, yeah, that's the problem, but only a small number affected. What do you think of that?
Well, the Housing Authority said, hey, you're sullying the reputation of the people who live in CHA. It's only 1% of all households who are affected by this. And it is a small number, but the number of CHA residents facing one strike in 2005 was fewer than 200, and by 2010, at a time where there are so many fewer units, the number is at 250. So the CHA is in the areas where one strike is being used the most, there are fewer units and more people affected by it.
Isn't the issue of one person's rights to everyone's rights? If you have 370 altogether, that they deserve to be protected?
I don't follow.
Well, the point, I guess, the Housing Authority is saying, yes, this is a problem in your point of view, but it's only a small number of people. But wouldn't the response be, even if it's one person who loses their home because they had someone visiting who happened to have a 2-pound bag of marijuana, that person shouldn't lose their home? I mean, don't we in this country stand on that one person's rights need to be defended at any cost?
Well, I think that, like I said, this story comes down to a real double standard. These are all based on an arrest. These cases are all based on an arrest, not a conviction. And so the CHA is initiating an eviction case and against people where it's not even, the police haven't even decided if they're going to pass the charge along to the courts. And
well, one of the things that I think is really that on your show, the Barbershop Show on Vocalo, you were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, and this kind of spontaneous conversation erupted about who is the CHA for? I mean, it's kind of like, I believe the CHA made a statement of something like, we are not the housing of last resort in Chicago, and that kind of set off a whole volcano of reaction.
Right. Well, right now, the CHA HUD is cutting, the feds are cutting money, or they're proposing in the next budget to cut back again on money for building public housing. It's like a $73 million cut that's proposed right now in Chicago. And, the plan for transformation, where they were knocking down traditional public housing and then rebuilding these mixed income communities, is really far behind. They're struggling to sell the phases of the project so that they can, build capital to build the next phase. And with less money coming in, that cripples that even more. But then, the CHA, I think what deserves to be questioned is that the CHA is also sitting on a lot of vacant units that have been rehabbed, or they're just holding them and deciding how they might rehab them, when they might rehab them, when they get more capital. And so there's an enormous need right now for affordable housing in Chicago, and the CHA is sitting on units that they're not delivering to people.
What happens in other cities? You look at that at all? Do they have the same one-strike rule?
Yeah, absolutely. One strike is a national policy. It basically, in 2000, it went to the Supreme Court. A grandmother in Oakland took her case all the way to the Supreme Court, and they ruled that she was not the person charged, it was a relative. And they said, yeah, it's the housing authority is within its rights to evict, but also within the HUD guidelines. And I think what's worth noting is that while the CHA has this enormous power to evict people under one strike across the country, also in another section of those guidelines, it also, HUD outlines the enormous responsibility that the CHA has to investigate these cases and to look and see, is this person, a threat to the health and safety and well-being and peaceful enjoyment of living in those properties? And the CHA isn't doing that now. What the CHA doing and other housing authorities across the country are doing, not all, but many, is they're taking that arrest and, they're moving the eviction forward based on that arrest. So this is happening across the country, but it's basically been legal aid advocates and the ACLU were involved in arguing against the policy when it went to the Supreme Court, but it's just kind of fallen off the radar because that was kind of the ultimate blow to the case.
Do you have any sense of the new CHA director? We've only got a few seconds left, but do you think the new director will take it in any different direction? Is there any evidence of that?
Well, that remains to be seen, but what I am hearing is that there are some people in Chicago who are contemplating another lawsuit and challenging the policy based on the CHA's unwillingness to follow that other clause within the policy that says that they also, with their great power comes great responsibility to vet these cases. So we'll see if that goes anywhere.
Isn't this part of a national policy that makes things tougher for people who once received welfare?
This was part of welfare reform.
And that's a very good question. We'll have to answer it on the next show because we just ran out of time. I'm really sorry. But Steve Franklin from the Chicago Headline Club and Community Media Workshop, thanks for being with us today. Angela Caputo from the Chicago Reporter, an excellent reporter doing some very good work over there. Really glad to have you with us on the show, and we'll revisit all these things again in the future. You have been watching Occupied Chicago Newsroom right here.
You don't want to leave now.
Oh, you don't want to leave? Oh, you're going to occupy. Yeah. So we're just going to keep going. I will just, while they're talking, remind you that you can watch this and all the other programs on cable, and you can see right here on CAN TV. And you can see these things on cantv.blip.tv if you would like, and you can also subscribe via iTunes, which we would very much like you to do. You can just come on down here and occupy the studio, too. I'm Ken Davis. Thanks so much for watching. We will catch you next time here on Occupy Chicago Newsroom.